I was 49 when I came back to the old house in Monroeville, Alabama. The same porch where I used to sit at my grandma's feet and shell peas on long, humid afternoons. The same porch where the wood creaked like it was sighing, tired of holding all the family secrets it had overheard for decades. The air was heavy that July afternoon, sweet with honeysuckle and memories I wasn't ready to face. I hadn't been back here since Mama's funeral 5 years ago, and I swore I never would. But now that the house was legally mine, I had no choice. As I unlocked the screen door, I caught sight of the faded rocking chair where Grandma used to sit. The cushion was still there, flattened, torn at the corner, the stuffing peeking out like time had finally won. I could almost hear her voice, raspy but warm. "Now, Marlene, don't you go thinking you know everything. Some truths ain't ready to be told yet." I used to think she was talking about her quilting patterns or the gossip from church, but standing there again, I realized she'd been talking about us, about this family. The first thing that hit me inside was the smell, wood polish, dust, and something faintly burnt, like the ghosts of Sunday dinners. I ran my hand along the dining table, tracing the scratches from years of family arguments that ended with somebody slamming a fork down and somebody else storming out. In the corner stood a small wooden chest, one I hadn't seen in years. I remembered it from childhood, when Grandma used to keep her church hats and her Bible in it. But now it looked different, scuffed, darker, almost hiding in the shadows. Something about it tugged at me. I knelt down, brushed away the dust, and found a small brass lock, old but not broken. The chest gave a soft click when I opened it. Inside were folded linens, some photographs, and beneath them, a small stack of yellowed envelopes tied together with twine. They smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Each was addressed in familiar looping cursive. "To my dearest Ruth." That was my mother's name. My hands trembled. The letters weren't from my grandfather. He'd been gone long before Mama was born. The postmarks were from Montgomery, dated 1969. The signature at the bottom of the first one read, "With all my heart, Samuel." But Samuel wasn't my grandfather's name. I sank into Grandma's rocking chair, the floorboards groaning beneath me like they were warning me to stop. But I couldn't. I read every word, and with each line, I felt the porch breathing heavier, as if the walls had been waiting decades for someone to finally open the wound. Samuel wrote about love, about promises, about a baby girl who was never supposed to be known. That baby girl was my mother. I sat there, numb, the letters trembling in my lap. My grandmother had hidden the truth of who my mother really was. And if Mama wasn't who we thought she was, then who was I? The magnolia trees beyond the porch whispered in the wind, and I could have sworn I heard Grandma's voice again. "Some truths don't die, Marlene. They just wait for you to be brave enough to find them." And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I hated her or missed her. But I knew one thing. Whatever was buried under this porch, I was going to dig it up.
That night, I didn't sleep much. The cicadas outside hummed like a warning, and every time the wind brushed across the old porch, I swore I could hear whispers in the boards, like the house itself remembered what it had hidden. I sat at the kitchen table with the stack of letters spread out in front of me, the twine undone and the paper edges curled like old wounds. I lit one of Grandma's leftover candles, the scent of lavender filling the room, and began reading again, slower this time, tracing every loop and curve of Samuel's handwriting. The letters weren't just love notes. They were confessions. In the second one, he wrote, "Ruth was born with your eyes, Evelyn. You mustn't tell anyone. My wife could never forgive such a thing, but you have my word. I'll take care of both of you, quietly." Evelyn, that was my grandmother's name. And Samuel, he wasn't some stranger. The way he spoke, the way he wrote about promises made it clear he was married to another woman when he and Grandma were together. I sat back, heart pounding, my throat tight. That meant my mother was born out of an affair, which meant my grandmother had lived her whole life carrying that lie. A rush of anger, pity, and confusion hit me all at once. I wanted to curse her for lying. Then again, how could I? Back in 1969, a black woman in Alabama caught in an affair with a married man, that could ruin your name, your family, your everything. Still, She passed that silence down like a family heirloom. My mother had spent her whole life feeling unwanted by Grandma, thinking she wasn't good enough. Now I knew why. Maybe Grandma couldn't look at her without remembering the mistakes she'd made. The candle flickered low, and I felt something inside me ache. Not just for Mama, but for all of us who grew up trying to be perfect in a house built on shame. Then, as I picked up the last letter, something strange happened. A folded scrap fell from between the pages, smaller, thicker paper, and not addressed to anyone. I opened it carefully, the paper almost disintegrating between my fingers. Inside was a single line in Grandma's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means the truth is yours now, but the rest of it, it's under the porch. I froze. Under the porch? My eyes darted toward the window where the dark outline of the porch railings loomed like a secret keeper. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on my shoes, and stepped outside. The boards creaked under my weight. The smell of wet earth mixed with old wood and something almost metallic. Kneeling down, I ran the flashlight along the floorboards until I found what I hadn't noticed before. One plank slightly lighter than the others, its edges newer, the nails different. I pried it up slowly, my fingers trembling. Dust and spider webs clung to the edges. Beneath it was a tin box, small and rusted, with initials carved faintly on top. E.W.H. Evelyn Ward Hayes. I pulled it out, heart thudding. The lid was stubborn, sealed tight with age. I used a kitchen knife to wedge it open, and when it finally gave, I nearly dropped it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Black and white, curled at the edges but clear enough to see faces. My grandmother, a man I assumed was Samuel, my mother as a child, standing between them. And one photo, the last in the stack, made my stomach twist. It was of Grandma, Mama, and a little boy I'd never seen before. Written on the back in faded blue ink were 3 words, Ruth and her brother. Brother? My mother had a brother? But no one had ever mentioned him. Not once in all the stories, all the arguments, all the family reunions. That night, I sat on the porch with the photographs spread out across my lap, the magnolia leaves brushing in the dark. Somewhere between the wind and the sound of crickets, I whispered, "Grandma, what else did you hide?" And for the first time, I realized the truth wasn't done with me yet, because those letters weren't just about love and betrayal. They were breadcrumbs, leading me somewhere deeper, and I was ready to follow them. I woke up with the sunrise bleeding through the lace curtains, my head resting on the porch swing where I'd fallen asleep. The tin box lay beside me half open, the photos scattered like ghosts that had waited too long to be seen. My first thought was of that little boy in the picture. My mother's brother, my uncle, the one no one had ever spoken about. I brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma grounding me as I flipped through the letters again. There were names I didn't recognize, towns mentioned that weren't far from here. The deeper I looked, the more I realized Grandma had built her whole life out of fragments she'd chosen to keep and the ones she'd buried. The porch boards still groaned under my feet when I stepped outside, as if protesting the secrets I'd unearthed. Morning light spilled over the magnolia tree, the same one Grandma used to sit under on hot days, shelling peas and humming those low, bluesy songs. That's when I decided I had to know who the boy was. I called Mama. She didn't answer. I tried again, heart thumping, then left a message. "Mama, it's me. I found something, some letters. And a picture. I need to talk to you." Her silence on the other end felt heavier than words. By noon, I was sitting in the county records office downtown, the kind of place where time moves slow and the smell of paper lived forever. The clerk, an older man with horn-rimmed glasses, looked at me curiously when I asked if he could help me find records on an Evelyn Ward Hayes. "Hayes?" he repeated, typing with deliberate slowness. "That's a familiar name around here." He flipped through a few folders, then paused. "It says here she had 2 children, Ruth Hayes, born 1970, and his brow furrowed, and one named Samuel Ward Jr., born 1972. Samuel. The name hit me like a slow punch to the gut. Grandma had named him after the man in the letters. But there's something else, the clerk said quietly, adjusting his glasses. Record shows the boy was placed into state care in 1977, ward of the county. My breath caught.
State care? You mean foster care? He nodded. No further records after that. It felt like the air went out of the room. Grandma had given her son away. My mother's brother. My uncle. I left the office clutching the photocopies like they might burn me if I held them too tight. The Alabama sun felt too bright, too cruel. When I got back to the house, Mama's car was already in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch steps, arms crossed, eyes hidden behind her sunglasses. I froze. She looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. You went digging where you shouldn't have. Mama, I started, but she cut me off. Your grandma made her peace with all that a long time ago. You don't need to stir it up again. I sat beside her, the boards creaking between us. You knew, I said softly, didn't you? She didn't answer. I pulled the photograph from my pocket, the one labeled Ruth and her brother. Why didn't you ever tell me? Her voice cracked just a little when she finally spoke. Because she made me promise. I turned toward her. Promise what? That I'd let the past stay buried. She whispered. That boy was my brother. Yes, but he wasn't just any boy. He was Samuel's son, the man she could never have. When his wife found out, there was a fight and everything fell apart. Grandma couldn't raise him here. Folks in town started talking. She said it was for his own good. Her voice broke, and I saw tears shimmer under the harsh sunlight. She never stopped talking about him, though. Mama said, even after she got sick. Every night, she'd sit on that porch and whisper his name like a prayer. I sat there in silence, the sound of cicadas filling the space between us. The porch, that same old porch, suddenly felt heavier, like the weight of every secret it had ever held was pressing down on me. Mama, I said after a long while, what if he's still out there? She looked at me, eyes hard but full of something else. Fear, maybe. Then you best be careful, baby. Sometimes finding the truth don't heal nothing. It just breaks open what's been holding you together. But it was too late, because once you start digging under the porch, you can't stop until you know how deep it goes. And I wasn't done digging.
That night, I couldn't sleep. The air was thick, heavy with that southern kind of humidity that clings to your skin and your thoughts. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like Grandma's voice warning me to leave things alone, but I couldn't. I kept seeing that little boy's face, my uncle, Samuel Jr., staring back at me from that faded photograph. Around midnight, I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out to the porch. The wood was cool beneath my bare feet. Crickets hummed in the distance and a faint wind rustled the magnolia leaves. I knelt where the tin box had been buried, running my hand over the boards. Something in me whispered there was more down there. More sheet hidden. I pried up one loose plank. Beneath it, the dirt was dry and compact, but a small corner of something metallic caught the light. My heart jumped. I dug it out carefully. Another small box, rusted shut. I carried it inside, wiped it clean with a towel, and wedged a butter knife under the latch. It opened with a soft click. Inside were letters, newer than the first ones, yellowed but not ancient. And on top, a photo. It was my grandmother again, older now, standing in front of the porch with a young man, dark-skinned, tall, with kind eyes and a cautious smile. He looked about 20. The back of the photo read, "Me and Sammy, 1993. My hands trembled. He had come back. The letters told the rest of the story, or at least what Grandma had chosen to keep. He had tracked her down years later after being bounced from one foster home to another. He'd written to her first, asking if she remembered him. She wrote back, begging him to come visit. He did. They had a relationship, secret but tender. The letters described their long talks on the porch, the way he'd sit at her feet while she told him stories about the family, the songs she used to sing. But one letter, the last one, stopped my heart cold. "Mama," it read, "I can't stay here no more. Aunt Ruth looks at me like I'm something dirty. I tried to make her see me, but she don't want me around. I think I'll head to Atlanta, try to make a life there. I love you, Mama, but I can't keep pretending I belong." It was dated 1994, 1 year before Grandma died. I pressed the paper to my chest and cried like a child. The sound of footsteps behind me made me jump. Mama stood in the doorway, her robe tied loosely, eyes puffy from crying. "I thought I told you to stop digging," she said softly. "You knew he came back. Why didn't you tell me?" Her lips quivered, and for a moment, she looked like a little girl again. "Because I wasn't kind to him. I was so angry. At her, at the whole world. He reminded me of what she'd done, of the lie we'd been living. I said things I can't take back. He left that night. She cried for weeks. I felt my anger rise, not at her, but at the pain that had festered in this house for decades. Mama, you could have told me.
You could have told somebody. She sat down beside me at the kitchen table, tracing her finger over the edge of the photograph. We all got ghosts, baby. Some folks talk to theirs, some try to forget them. I thought if I ignored mine long enough, they'd stop haunting me, but they didn't, I whispered. No, she said, her voice barely audible. They never do. We sat there in silence. Just the hum of the fridge and the steady ticking of Grandma's old wall clock. I thought of all the women who had lived in this house, carrying secrets that broke their backs but never their spirits. I need to find him, I said finally. Samuel Jr., or whatever name he goes by now. Mama looked at me like I just said I wanted to fly to the moon. You think he wants to be found after all this time? I don't know. But if Grandma loved him enough to keep these letters, I owe her that much. Mama's eyes softened. You sound just like her, you know. Once she set her mind on something, there was no stopping her. I smiled faintly through my tears. Guess I come by it honest. As the night wore on, I made copies of the letters and tucked the originals safely back into the box. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had to start somewhere. Outside, the wind picked up and the old porch groaned again. I could almost hear Grandma's voice in the creak and sigh of the wood, low, steady, loving. Find him, baby. Bring him home. And for the first time since I opened that first letter, I felt purpose burning stronger than fear. Tomorrow, I'd drive to Atlanta. I was gonna find the man who'd been erased from our family, and maybe, finally, bring peace to the house that had been waiting too long for truth.
The next morning, the Alabama sun broke through my curtains like it had been waiting for me to move. I stood at the sink, sipping my coffee, the taste flat and bitter. Maybe because my mind wasn't on breakfast. My eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen table, where the box of letters sat under a folded towel, quiet but heavy with meaning. Mama hadn't said much after last night. She'd gone to bed with tears still drying on her cheeks, and when I checked on her before leaving, she was sitting at her vanity, staring into the mirror. I kissed her forehead, whispered I'd be back soon, and she just nodded. I packed a small bag, tucked the photograph of Grandma and Samuel Jr. into my purse, and slid behind the wheel of my old Chevy Malibu. The engine coughed before it came to life, like it didn't want to make this trip any more than I did. The drive from Montgomery to Atlanta was just under 3 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. I rolled the windows down, letting the warm wind whip through my curls. I passed long stretches of pine trees, rusted mailboxes, and roadside diners with faded signs. Somewhere past LaGrange, I spotted a church billboard that read, "The truth will set you free." John 8:32. It made me laugh, one of those dry, shaky laughs that turns into a sigh. That verse had followed me since childhood, printed on church fans, painted on Grandma's kitchen wall, even quoted in sermons she'd made me sit through when I was little. I used to think it was just about honesty. Now I realized it was about courage, the kind it takes to uncover truth that hurts. By the time I hit Atlanta city limits, traffic had thickened and the skyline rose like a promise. I pulled off near Cascade Heights, where Grandma once told me her cousin used to live, and found a small diner called Mabel's Kitchen. It looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Chrome stools, checkered floors, and the smell of grits and bacon thick in the air. I ordered coffee and asked the waitress, a woman about my age, with sharp eyes and a warm smile, if she knew of any community centers or shelters nearby where a man named Samuel Hayes might have worked or volunteered years ago. Samuel Hayes? She repeated, tapping her pen against her pad. That name sounded familiar. What did he look like? I pulled out the photo and showed her. Her face changed, not in shock, but recognition. Baby, I think I know who you talking about. There's a man down at New Vision Baptist, been helping with their food drives for years. Folks just call him Mr. Sam. You might want to try there. I thanked her fast. I almost forgot to pay. My hands trembled as I typed the address into my phone. The church was small, tucked between a laundromat and a barber shop. I parked out front and just sat for a moment, staring at the entrance. I could hear gospel music faintly from inside, a choir singing "His Eye is on the Sparrow." That was Grandma's favorite hymn. I stepped out, my legs shaky,
but determined. Inside, a handful of people were stacking canned goods and folding clothes into bins. A tall man with salt and pepper hair was directing them, his back to me. There was something familiar in the way he moved, calm, careful, like someone used to carrying more than just boxes. "Excuse me," I said softly. He turned around, and there he was. Older, yes. His hair shorter, his face lined by time and sunlight, but those eyes, those deep, kind eyes, I'd seen them in the photograph and in the mirror, staring back at me every morning. "Mr. Sam?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled politely. "That's me. Can I help you, miss?" For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. "My name's Ruthie Ward. I think you knew my grandmother, Evelyn Hayes." At her name, something in his face broke open. Surprise, sorrow, recognition, all at once. He took a small step closer, studying me like a man seeing a ghost. "Evelyn's granddaughter?" he said softly. I nodded. He blinked hard, his hand gripping the edge of a table for balance. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. "You got her eyes." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "I found your letters under the porch." He closed his eyes then, not in shame, but in something like relief. I was wondering if anyone ever would. The choir's song swelled behind us, voices rising high and full of spirit. I wanted to say 100 things, ask 1,000 questions, but all that came out was, "Why'd you never come back?" He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes glassy. "Child, some wounds don't close easy. I tried, but your mama, she made it plain she didn't want me around. And your grandma, she told me to stay gone until she could make peace with her past. By the time I came back again, she was gone." My heart ached. "She wanted you to be found," I said. "She left those letters for me." He smiled faintly, tears brimming in his eyes. "Then I guess it's time." We stood there for a long moment, two strangers connected by blood and secrets, and I knew right then that Grandma hadn't just left me a mystery, she'd left me a mission. And standing there in that little Atlanta church with sunlight streaming through the stained glass, I realized something I hadn't before. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from finally facing the truth together. Mr. Sam sat me down in a wooden pew toward the back of the church. The choir had finished singing, and now a low hum of voices and laughter filled the room as people packed away hymn books and folded chairs. Sunlight pooled across the floor, dust motes floating in the air like tiny ghosts. He sat beside me, rubbing his palms together, slow and deliberate, like a man winding up the courage to unbury his own story. "I loved your grandmother," he said finally, voice low, almost reverent. "Lord knows I did. We were young when we met, too young to know that love can't survive every secret." He glanced at me, eyes heavy with years of what-ifs. "You see, Evelyn wasn't just my sweetheart. She was my sister's best friend. And my sister, well, she was your mama's real mother." The words hit me like a cold wind. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "Wait, what?" He nodded slowly, the sadness in his face confirming what my heart already knew. "Your grandma raised your mama as her own after my sister Lillian passed. Evelyn thought it'd save her, keep her from the shame of the choices she made. Lillian had you early with a man nobody wanted to talk about, so Evelyn stepped in. Told everyone that baby was hers." I swallowed hard, every breath sharp and tight. "So my mother, she's not Evelyn's daughter?" "She was in every way that mattered, but blood-wise, no. And your mama never forgave Evelyn for that lie. She found out when she was 16. I tried to talk to her, but she wanted nothing to do with either one of us. She said Evelyn stole her life." My hands trembled as I pressed them into my lap. All those years of coldness, the silence between my mother and grandma, it wasn't hate. It was heartbreak, betrayal that never got healed. I stared at the stained glass window ahead, a picture of a lamb and a shepherd,
light glinting off the colored panes, and thought about all the nights I'd heard Mama crying in her room, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Maybe she wasn't just mourning Grandma. Maybe she was mourning the truth she couldn't live with. Why didn't Grandma tell me? I whispered. She wanted to, but she also wanted you to come to it on your own. She used to say, "Ruthie's got my heart, but she's got her mama's pride. She'll come to understand when the time's right." He looked out the window, sunlight tracing the silver in his beard. Evelyn carried that secret to protect everyone but herself. That's what love looks like sometimes. Heavy and quiet. I leaned back in the pew, tears welling up. She carried that lie her whole life, and it broke them both. He nodded. Sometimes truth is too sharp to touch when it's fresh. Folks think they're saving each other, but really they just push the wound deeper. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. All the puzzle pieces were finally fitting, but instead of peace, I felt a strange ache settle in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, something deeper, something that whispered, "Now what will you do with it?" Sam must have sensed my storm because he said softly, "You got a choice now, Ruthie. You can let this truth burn through you like it did them, or you can use it to rebuild what's left." I turned to him, my voice barely steady. "How do I even start?" He smiled faintly. "By forgiving them both. And yourself. Ain't no healing without forgiveness." Outside, a car horn blared, and I looked out to see the city moving on, unaware that my whole world had just shifted under my feet. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of the letters, the one where Grandma wrote, "The porch remembers everything we hide beneath it." I handed it to him. He took it carefully, reading her looping script. His lips trembled as he mouthed the words. Then with a slow, shaking breath, he said, "She always did write like she was praying." We sat there a long time, 2 generations joined by one truth. The air between us felt lighter somehow, like Grandma herself was there, sitting on that pew, whispering that it was finally okay to let go. When I finally stood to leave, Sam reached for my hand. "You come back tomorrow. There's someone you need to meet, your mama's cousin. She knows the rest." I nodded, though my knees were weak. As I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun painted the church in gold. The air was warm, full of the scent of honeysuckle and summer dust. And for the first time since I found that box, I didn't feel haunted. I felt called. Maybe Grandma wasn't just asking me to uncover the past. Maybe she was asking me to heal what came after. And as I drove away, the words I'd seen on that church billboard came back again. But this time, they didn't sound like scripture. They sounded like her voice. "The truth will set you free, baby. But first, it'll test your heart." That night, I stayed in a small motel off I-85, the kind of place where the air conditioner rattles, the carpet smells faintly of bleach, and the lamplight makes everything look sepia, like an old photograph. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the freeway, unable to stop replaying Sam's words. "Your mama's real mother." The sentence kept circling back, as steady and cruel as a church bell. I thought about Grandma's porch back home, those creaking boards under which her truth had slept for decades. How many times had I sat on that very spot, drinking sweet tea, never knowing there were ghosts beneath my feet? When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of hands. My grandmother's, my mother's, mine, all pressed against the same piece of wood, reaching for the same letters. But in the dream, the wood began to crumble and light spilled through the cracks, bright enough to hurt. I woke before dawn, heart pounding. The air was still, but my spirit felt restless. I packed my bag, checked out, and stopped at a diner nearby for breakfast. The waitress, an older woman with bright red lipstick, called everyone Sugar. When she brought my grits, she said, "You look like a woman carrying too many words in her chest." I smiled faintly. "You don't know how right you are." She nodded, poured my coffee, and said, "Well, baby, pour some out. Can't heal what you won't release." Those simple words stayed with me the whole drive back to the church. When I arrived, Sam was outside talking to a woman with deep brown skin and tight silver curls pulled into a bun. She wore a floral dress and church shoes, even though it was barely 8 in the morning. The moment she turned to look at me, I saw a faint resemblance.
her eyes, warm but sharp like Mama's. She wore a floral dress and church shoes even though it was barely 8 in the morning. "Ruthie," Sam said, "this here is Miss Corrine. She's your mama's cousin." She knew Lillian. Corrine reached for my hand, gripping it firmly. "Lord have mercy," she said. "You'd a spittin' image of Evelyn when she was your age. Same posture, same quiet fire." My throat tightened. "You knew about all of it?" She sighed, glancing toward the church doors. "Knew enough, but family don't always want to hear truth that rearranges their picture frames." We went inside, sat at a small table in the fellowship hall. The smell of coffee and old wood filled the room. Corrine folded her hands. "Your grandmother wasn't wrong for what she did. Lillian was young, wild, and folks back then judged a girl faster than they'd blink. Evelyn thought she could spare her the shame, but she didn't count on love turning to silence." Her voice softened. "When your mama found out, she said Evelyn robbed her of her own story. But what she didn't see was that Evelyn was just trying to protect her. Same way mamas always do, even when it hurts." I sat there quiet, the weight of generations pressing on my chest. Corrine leaned forward. "You can't change what they did, baby, but you can stop the curse of silence. That's how families heal, one truth at a time." I nodded slowly, tears filling my eyes. "I want to. I just don't know where to start." "Start by talking to your mama. Not as a child begging answers, but as a woman who understands how hard choices get made." Her words landed like prayer. When I stood to leave, Corrine pressed something into my palm, a small silver locket, old and worn. She said one day it would find its way home. I opened it. Inside was a faded picture of 3 young women, Evelyn, Lillian, and a man I didn't recognize. They were standing in front of the porch, smiling, sunlight glowing behind them. I closed the locket gently and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, the morning had fully bloomed. Birds sang in the trees, the sky stretched wide and forgiving. I turned toward Sam, who stood by his truck, watching me with quiet understanding. "You go on now. You got some reckoning to do." I nodded, tucking the locket against my heart. The drive back home felt different this time. The road no longer stretched with dread. It pulsed with purpose. Every mile carried me closer to the porch, to Mama, to the truth that had waited too long to be spoken aloud. And as I crossed the Alabama line, I whispered a promise to the women who came before me, the ones who lied, who loved, who tried. I will not hide our truth in the dark anymore. I will speak it in daylight until it no longer hurts to remember. By the time I turned onto the dirt road leading to Mama's house, the Alabama sun was high and merciless. The magnolias that lined the lane looked heavy with heat, their waxy leaves trembling in the air. The house came into view, the same white frame, the same peeling paint, and the same front porch that had become the center of all my questions. For a moment, I just sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel. It felt strange to be here again, knowing what I knew now. This was the house where lies had been folded into lullabies, where secrets had been swept under the same floorboards that carried our laughter. When I stepped out, the boards of the porch groaned like they were greeting me or warning me. I could smell Mama's cooking drifting through the window, that familiar mix of onions, okra, and cornbread. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. Mama came to the door, wiping her hands on a towel. Her hair was tied back with a scarf, streaks of gray catching the sunlight. She froze when she saw me. "Lord, Ruth," she said softly, "you look tired." I nodded. "Been driving all night." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Well, come on in then. Ain't no sense talking on the porch when the air's this thick." Inside, everything was as I remembered. The ticking clock on the wall, the faded family photos, the old armchair where Grandma used to knit. It was like stepping into a memory, but one that now had a shadow cast across it. We sat at the kitchen table. Mama poured sweet tea into 2 glasses, her hands steady but her eyes never quite meeting mine. "You went to Montgomery," she said. It wasn't a question. I did. I pulled the locket from my pocket and set it on the table between us. "I met Corrine. She told me the truth." Mama's face went still for a long moment. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. Then she sighed, a kind of sigh that carries years of exhaustion. "I figured you'd find out one day. I just didn't think it hurt this much when you did." "Why didn't you tell me, Mama? Why let me believe Grandma was perfect when she lied to you
and to me. Mama looked out the window, where sunlight dappled through the trees. She was perfect in her way, she said quietly. She made mistakes, sure, but everything she did to protect me. Back then, being an unwed black woman with a baby wasn't just frowned on. It could ruin you. Folks whispered, jobs disappeared, neighbors turned cold. Evelyn thought she could build me a life by building a lie. I swallowed hard, but it broke you instead. Tears welled in Mama's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. It did, but I forgave her a long time ago, Ruthie. I just didn't know how to tell you without breaking that forgiveness open again. I reached across the table, took her hand in mine. Mama, I said softly, keeping pain locked away doesn't heal it. It just passes it down. I felt it every time you looked at Grandma with those half-closed eyes, like you were remembering something you couldn't say. Mama squeezed my hand. You sound just like her, you know. Stubborn as the day is long. We both laughed a little, the kind of laugh that cracks through sorrow like sunlight through clouds. After a long silence, she asked, "You went under the porch, didn't you?" I nodded. I found the letters. Mama closed her eyes. Lord, those letters haunted me. Every time I swept that porch, I thought about digging them up, but I never could. Too much truth in that dirt. I hesitated and said, I think Grandma wanted us to find them. Maybe she knew it was time for her story to breathe. Mama leaned back, looking up toward the ceiling. Maybe she did. Maybe she just wanted us to see her for who she was, a woman who tried. We sat in that kitchen for hours, sharing memories that had been locked away for years. Mama told me about Lillian, my real grandmother, about her laughter that could fill a whole room and her singing voice that drew people from the street. She told me how Evelyn had taken her in when no one else would, how love and shame had tangled until no one could tell them apart. By the time the sun began to set, something in the air felt different, lighter. Mama looked at me, her expression soft but certain. You did good going after the truth, Ruthie. You did what I couldn't. I smiled through tears. I didn't do it alone. They all led me here. Even the ones who tried to keep me away. Outside, the cicadas had begun to sing and a warm wind rustled the porch boards. I stood and looked out through the screen door at the magnolia tree swaying gently in the dusk. For the first time in generations, that porch didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt like home. Cracks, lies, love, and all. And for the first time in generations, silence wasn't our family inheritance anymore. The next morning, the world outside was hushed, blanketed in soft gray mist. I stood barefoot on the porch, clutching one of the old letters in my hand. The ink had faded over time, but the words still burned fresh, raw, confessional, trembling with regret. Mama was still asleep inside. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock and the creak of wood settling beneath me. The same boards that had hidden the truth for decades now held me steady. I unfolded the letter again. It was written by Evelyn, not the saintly woman whose recipes and quilts people still praised in town, but a flawed, frightened soul, trying to explain what couldn't be undone. She wrote, I buried these words because I couldn't carry them anymore. I wanted you to hate me less. I wanted Ruth to know love without my shame. But I see now that silence has its own cruelty. My throat tightened. Every word felt like she was whispering through time, through guilt and grace, straight to me. I looked toward the garden where Mama used to help Grandma plant jasmine every spring. The flowers had overgrown, wild and untamed, crawling up the fence. I walked over, letter still in hand, and kneeled in the damp soil. That's where I found the small, rusted tin box, half buried under ivy, the one Grandma must have used to keep her most private things. Inside were two more letters, a photograph of a baby girl and a small gold cross. The photograph was worn to a blur, but I could make out Mama's eyes, my eyes. The handwriting on the back said, My Lillian's child. May she never doubt she was loved. I broke then. The tears came fast and hot, mixing with the earth beneath my hands. It wasn't anger this time. It was grief, yes, but it was also understanding. Evelyn hadn't been trying to erase the past. She'd been trying to rewrite the pain. When Mama came outside, she stood in the doorway watching me. I turned, holding the tin box out to her. I think she wanted you to have this, I said softly. Mama hesitated, her face unreadable. Then she came closer, her hands trembling as she took the box. When she saw the photo, a sob escaped her, deep and guttural, like something that had been locked in her chest for years. She kept it, Mama whispered. After all that, she still kept it. I nodded.
tears still on my cheeks. She did. She just didn't know how to say she was sorry. Mama sank onto the porch step beside me, the photo clutched to her chest. You ever notice how forgiveness don't always come with words? Sometimes it just sits in the quiet, waiting for you to see it. We sat together for a long time, watching the mist lift and the sunlight slowly spill across the yard. I leaned my head against her shoulder, a gesture that had always felt too hard before, but now came naturally, like a door finally opening. After a while, Mama said, "We should burn the rest of the letters. Not to destroy them, just to let them rest." So that's what we did. We built a small fire in the tin barrel behind the shed. The flames licked high, orange and gold, reflecting in Mama's eyes. One by one, we fed the letters to the fire, watching the paper curl and blacken, the words lifting away in thin ribbons of smoke. When it was done, Mama held my hand. She asked, "You feel that?" "What?" "The quiet. It's clean now." And she was right. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't heavy with things unsaid. It was soft, forgiving, like the pause after a prayer. That night, we cooked dinner together. Fried catfish, collard greens, and cornbread, just like Grandma used to make. The kitchen filled with the scent of home. Mama hummed while she stirred the pot, her voice low and steady. And I joined her. When we sat down to eat, she said, "You know, Ruthie, I think it's time we start telling our stories great. Not the pretty ones, the real ones." I smiled. "Yeah, I think Grandma would like that." Later, I walked out to the porch alone. The boards were still warm from the day's sun. I could almost hear Evelyn's voice. Not the voice of the secret keeper, but of a woman who finally found her way to peace. As the fireflies flickered across the yard, I whispered, "We forgive you." And somewhere in that thick Alabama night, I swore I heard the porch sigh. Not from age, but from relief.
2 weeks passed before I dared pull up the loose boards beneath the porch again. The morning air was thick with the smell of pine and last night's rain, and a slant of sunlight spilled through the gaps like a blessing. I had scrubbed the porch clean, polished the railings, even patched the screen door. But that creaking wood beneath my feet still called to me, not out of fear anymore, out of curiosity, out of the need to finish what I'd started. Mama had gone back to Montgomery for a few days, visiting old friends and finally letting herself rest. That left me here alone, just me, this old house, and the ghosts that had decided to speak at last. I knelt with a crowbar and lifted one of the planks. The dirt underneath was darker than I expected, damp and heavy, as though it had been keeping secrets for far too long. My hands were trembling, but I kept going, pulling up board after board until I saw it, a rusted tin box, larger than the one from the garden. The latch broke easily. Inside, the smell of age hit me, dust, old ink, something faintly metallic. There were more letters, but these weren't tied neatly. They were scattered, frantic, and some had been torn open, like someone had tried to read and then hide them again in haste. The handwriting wasn't Evelyn's this time. It was my grandfather's. I had never met him. He died when Mama was a baby, but his words came alive in those pages. He wrote about betrayal, about how Evelyn had loved another man once, and how that love had fractured their family from the inside. I tried to forgive her, but every time I look at Ruth, I see the truth we buried. Not her fault, but still the proof of what was done. The words felt like a knife turning slow. I could almost see him sitting at the same porch, pen trembling in hand, wrestling between love and bitterness. Then came a smaller folded note tucked between the pages, different handwriting. Evelyn's again. "If you ever find these, Marlene, know this. We were all broken in our own ways, but every piece of that breaking was done in love, even when it looked like hate." I sat back on my heels, the words echoing in my head. The porch beneath me felt alive, the boards groaning softly as if they remembered every tear, every argument, every prayer whispered into the night. I realized then that this porch wasn't cursed. It wasn't haunted. It was witness to everything we couldn't say, everything we tried to bury, and maybe that was its purpose, to hold us accountable until we were ready to face it. I gathered the letters and placed them in a wooden box I found in the hallway. This time, I didn't plan to burn them. I wanted to keep them. Not as shame, but as proof of what survival looks like when you're taught to hide your scars. When Mama came home later that afternoon, she saw the dirt under my fingernails and the open space where the planks used to be. "You digging up history again?" she asked, half smiling. "Just finishing what you and Grandma started," I said. She sighed, a deep, tired sigh. "Maybe it's time that porch stops holding secrets and starts holding stories instead." I smiled. "Yeah, maybe we turn it into something new, something honest." That night, under a dim porch light, Mama and I sanded the edges of the new planks. We painted them soft cream, the same color Evelyn once used on her kitchen cabinets. And when we laid them down again, we did it slow, careful, reverent, like sealing a promise instead of a lie. I carved a small heart under the last board before I nailed it down, not where anyone could see, but where the house would know. Inside it, I etched 3 initials, E-L-R, Evelyn, Lillian, Ruth. When I stood, my knees creaking like the floorboards, I looked out across the yard, at the magnolia tree, at the garden Mama had tended, and at the quiet sky turning to dusk. I whispered, "We remember." And I swear the breeze shifted, soft and sweet, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain. The porch didn't sigh this time. It simply breathed with us. Light, open, whole. After we finished repainting the porch, I sat on the steps that night with my hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The boards beneath me were still tacky with paint, and the air smelled of rain-soaked wood and camellias. Fireflies blinked lazily over the grass, and the world felt quieter than it had in a long time. For weeks, the house had felt heavy with ghosts, not the kind that rattled chains, but the kind that whispered and dreamed. Now it just felt watchful, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. Mama came outside and joined me on the steps, still wearing her house coat and fuzzy slippers. She didn't say anything for a while, just sat beside me, sipping coffee, letting the sounds of crickets fill the silence. Finally, she said, "You ever think maybe Grandma did all that, hid those letters, kept those lies because she didn't want us to be broken? I think she did it because she didn't know any other way," I said softly. "She came from a world where you kept quiet to survive." Mama nodded slowly, her eyes glistening in the porch light. "Guess I learned that same thing." I reached for her hand. It was smaller than I remembered, delicate, trembling slightly, but still warm. "You don't have to keep quiet anymore," I said. That's when she started to cry. Not the quiet tears I was used to seeing, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere buried. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, feeling every tremor of pain, every breath of release. We stayed like that until the night hummed back to life around us. Inside, the box of letters sat on the kitchen table, open. I had decided not to hide them again. Maybe one day I'd give them to Tasha, my daughter, so she'd understand where she came from. Not the prettied up version, but the truth. When I called her later that night, her voice was soft and cautious, the way it always was when she didn't know how I'd take what she said. "You sound different, Mama," she told me, "like you let something go." I think I did. I think we all did. Good, because I want to come down next weekend. Bring the girls. Maybe we can see that old porch of yours. Her words filled me with something warm, not just pride, but peace. Generations have been divided by what we couldn't say. Now, for the first time, it felt like we were learning how to speak again. The next morning, I walked through the house with sunlight spilling across the floorboards. I ran my fingers over the walls, feeling the cool, uneven plaster that Evelyn had patched herself all those years ago. The air smelled like lemon oil and old paper. I thought about all the things I had wanted to throw away, the worn out quilts, the chipped dishes, the cracked mirror in the hallway, and I realized
I couldn't. Each one carried a story. Each one belonged. Maybe that's what forgiveness really was. Not forgetting the hurt, not pretending it didn't happen, but choosing what parts of the story you wanted to keep and learning to live with the rest. When Mama woke up, I found her standing in the kitchen with her hand on that box of letters. "You think we should read the rest?" she asked me. "Not today. Let's let them rest a while. We've already heard what we needed." She smiled then, a small, tired smile, but real. "Maybe we can plant something out front. Make it pretty again." I was thinking the same. Something that lasts. We both turned toward the porch, toward that patch of earth where the first letters had been found. The morning sun fell right across it, like it had been waiting to bless something new. And in that quiet moment, I realized healing wasn't about digging everything up. It was about knowing when to stop digging.
The following weekend, the house filled with laughter again. For the first time in years, it wasn't haunted, it was alive. Tasha arrived just after noon, her SUV crunching over the gravel drive, her two girls tumbling out before the car had even stopped. I stood on the porch, apron dusted with flour, and for a second, it felt like time folded in on itself. 3 generations of Hayes women standing in the same sunlight, each carrying the echoes of the ones before. "Mama," Tasha called, that same grin I remembered from when she was little flashing across her face. "You look good, peaceful even." I laughed softly, opening my arms as she came up the steps. "Guess a little truthful do that for a woman." She hugged me tight, and when she pulled back, her eyes flickered down toward the new planks beneath our feet. "So this is the porch, huh? The one that's been holding all the family secrets?" "This is her," I said, tapping the rail lightly. "But she's done keeping them. She's just a porch again." We all laughed. The girls ran circles around the yard, chasing each other, shrieking with that kind of joy only children still know. Mama came out with a pitcher of sweet tea and 3 mismatched brasses, her robe fluttering in the breeze. She looked older, slower, but softer too, like the years had finally loosened their grip on her. We sat together under the awning, sipping tea and watching the girls play. The afternoon light was honey gold, the same shade that used to pour through Evelyn's kitchen window when I was a child. I wondered then if she'd be proud, not of what we uncovered, but of what we were building in its place. After a while, Tasha leaned forward and said quietly, "Mama, you gonna tell me what was really in those letters?" I took a breath, letting the moment stretch. The wind rustled through the magnolia leaves. The porch creaked softly, and I felt Evelyn's presence like a heartbeat under my feet. "Maybe one day," I said, "but not today. What matters is we understand each other now. We don't have to keep burying the hard things." Tasha nodded. "I don't want my girls growing up afraid of our story." "They won't," I said firmly. "We'll tell it right. The whole thing, the love and the pain both. That's what makes it real." One of the girls, little Kennedy, ran up then with a handful of dandelions. "Grandma, can we plant flowers here? I want to make it pretty." I smiled. "You know, that's just what your great-grandma Evelyn would have wanted." We all went down to the yard, hands in the dirt, planting dandelions and daisies right along the porch edge. Mama knelt beside us, humming an old gospel tune, her fingers trembling but steady. Tasha's laughter mixed with the girls' giggles, and for a moment, the world was perfect. Messy, loud, honest, and whole. When we finished, the sun was setting, the sky blushing pink and gold. I sat back on the porch steps, brushing soil from my palms, and watched the light dance across the yard. "Mama," Tasha said quietly, "you ever think Grandma meant for you to find those letters?" I smiled at that, not bitterly, not sadly, but with a deep, knowing warmth. I think she did. Maybe she couldn't tell us the truth herself, but she knew one of us would need to. The air cooled as the first stars blinked awake. I felt something shift inside me, the weight of generations lifting, not disappearing, but turning light. I looked at my mother, my daughter, my granddaughters, 4 generations of women bound by blood, by secrets, by the fierce will to survive. And I realized then the porch didn't just hold our pain, it held our strength too. Later that night,
After everyone had gone inside, I stayed a while longer on the porch. The boards beneath me were warm from the day's sun. The air was filled with the scent of earth and tea and the faint echo of laughter. I reached into my pocket and pulled out one last folded letter, Evelyn's final one, the one I hadn't read aloud to anyone. I opened it under the porch light and read her words again. The truth doesn't destroy families, Marlene. Silence does. Promise me you'll speak, even when it trembles. I whispered into the stillness, I promise. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The porch groaned softly beneath me, like an old friend stretching after a long sleep. Fireflies drifted through the night air. The stars shimmered above, and I felt Evelyn's spirit. Not watching, not warning, just resting. The story that began in shame ended in grace. And I knew, deep down, that every woman in our family, past, present, and future, would walk a little taller because of it.